Today we're answering the question, is getting angry ever an appropriate response to a situation? Hey everyone, welcome to The Pursuit with James Griffin. My name is Mike Anthony, and I'm the discipleship pastor here at Crosspoint City Church. And I'm here, of course, with our lead pastor, James Griffin. Now, James, you were out doing some fishing in Montana, and then the next week I was out taking the beach to the family, and now we're kind of back in the mix, and we were kind of joking around a little bit. I'm a little rusty, so we might stumble through this a little bit,
That's
but
okay,
I think
man. That's all right.
I think we can make it.
Listen, I believe in you, Mike.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you, man.
All right, so last week you and Will talked a lot about alcohol, which is
super easy subject
in the church world. Is a wildly controversial subject.
Yes, it
Lots
is.
of opinions and views, and some of them are heated, and some of them aren't, and some of them are legitimate.
I think we've seen some of that in the comment section on social media, so it's all good.
Yes. So we are going to be tackling maybe not as hot a topic as alcohol, but still an interesting one where we're going to be talking about anger.
Right.
Right? Because growing up, personally, anger was an unacceptable emotion. Mm-hmm. Right? So to get angry was... the only acceptable emotion was happiness. And if you weren't happy, then you need to fix it and get happy, right? Then anger was like the opposite of happiness, which
taboo.
Made it doubly bad. Like you can never, ever be angry. But we're gonna continue on in John in chapter 2, and we're gonna see something interesting from Jesus where he gets angry.
Right.
So let's jump in the passage. Help us understand what's going on.
Well, like you just said, we see what happens when God gets angry.
Yeah.
Okay, Jesus gets angry, and rightfully so. John sets the scene. Jesus goes to the city of Jerusalem. Passover is about to start. It was this annual Jewish celebration, and millions of Jews would travel into the city to celebrate God freeing their ancestors from Egyptian slavery. And so as part of the celebration, you would go to the temple and make sacrifices. Jewish men would go and they would pay their temple tax. And so Jesus does what everyone else would do, and he goes to the temple. And so when he shows up, he finds people selling animals. And I made this point in the sermon, but that wasn't the problem in and of itself.
Selling stuff.
Right. The problem was with how and where they were selling these animals. So first they were selling them at inflated prices. So these animals were marked up. I equated it to going to the sporting event, and you pay $10 for the same Coke you would buy at the gas station for $1. It's super frustrating, but they were profiting off the people's obedience in this way. They were also selling these animals in an area of the temple known as the Court of the Gentiles, which was the only area of the temple that non-Gentile or non-Jewish, people could go into, guys like you and me. And so these people that were limited in where they could go, they couldn't even get in the doors because this religious marketplace was set up in their space. And then there were the money changers, because when you went to buy a temple animal or you went to pay your temple tax, you couldn't use your money. You had to use temple money. So you would go exchange your money for temple money, and they were charging a fee to do all that. And then one interesting note, and I pointed this out over the weekend, Jesus singles out those who were selling birds. Because this was the sacrifice of choice for poor people. You couldn't afford to bring a lamb, you would bring a bird. You couldn't bring an ox, you would bring a bird. And so Jesus walks into this marketplace, and he sees all of this corruption happening, and he gets angry. Angry that God is being dishonored in his own house. Angry that people who are far from God are being kept from God by people who claim to know God. And he's angry that poor, powerless people are being exploited and taken advantage of, primarily by those in positions of power. And so I love the response. Man, he makes a whip, And I joked.
That's how you know someone's serious.
Straight up. I joked about this over the weekend. You got to be pretty mad to go outside and make your own whip.
It would take a while.
This is what he did. And so this was well thought through. We talked about this in small group last night. You just said it. It probably took a little while to construct the whip. And so this was not Jesus simply reacting. He knew what he was getting ready to do. I mean, he was thinking this through. So he takes the whip in, drives out the people, and the animal starts turning over tables, pouring out money, and he cleanses the temple all for the glory of God and the good of those who were being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And so that really is what we spent most of our time over the weekend talking about from John chapter 2.
Yeah. It's interesting when I was reading over the passage, and it kind of dawned on me, the people that he had just run out of there.
Yeah.
None of them are concerned about how the people are going to make their sacrifice. Like, they're not worried about, they're just like, hey, you're kind of messing up our show here.
Yeah.
And their livelihood, because they were making ridiculous sums of money.
Correct.
Off of this. I appreciated the point you made, because people will use this passage a lot to say, well, you can't sell anything in the church.
Right.
Right. So like if a church has a bookstore, we have, we have the little coffee bar set up. They'll use like, well, you can't sell so. Jesus turned the tables over on the money. This is sin.
Right.
But understanding the fact that they were always there.
Yeah.
Because people making that trip, they may not have been able to bring an animal with them, or they didn't have an animal to sacrifice. Period. So they had to go there to purchase the animal.
Right.
They were just taking advantage of it.
Well, this is the importance of reading your whole Bible.
The Old Testament does matter.
That's But seriously, man, we can't just cherry pick the Bible and make silly arguments from passages taken out of context from the Bible as a whole. So the Deuteronomy 14 provision that you're talking about, God allowed these animals to be sold.
Yeah.
He made this provision so that people traveling in from long distances could just bring money and buy what they needed when they got there to make their offerings and their sacrifices.
Yeah.
So again, it wasn't problematic that they were selling. It was problematic with how and where they were selling.
Yeah.
I use the illustration. It would be like us today charging for parking spaces, charging for seats, charging for you to receive prayer before you head out the door. And so that really is what Jesus walked into, and anger was the appropriate response in that situation, which I think probably leads us into the next question.
So this is, the majority of the questions that got submitted were really around this kind of idea of anger.
Yeah.
And when is it appropriate? Like, what is righteous anger, that type of thing.
Right.
So the first one we got is, how do we respond to fellow believers who claim to have the same, putting up the air quotes because they did, righteous anger as Jesus, but over trivial things and at the expense of people?
Love that. Well, I think we have to start by first defining the word righteous, and I'll use the air. It's funny, my daughter Rowan, my oldest daughter, she's been trying to figure out how to use the air quotes recently at home. We've been having conversations, so this is timely. I'll show her the question later, but we have to define the word righteous, and I've given this simple definition in the past. To be righteous is to do right by God and right by people.
Yeah.
To be righteous is to do right by God and right by people. And so righteous anger then would be anger that accomplishes that. Mm-hmm. So in other words, I'll say like this is anger directed at the right things in the right way and for the right reasons.
Right.
That is what we see happening when Jesus goes into the temple. His anger wasn't about him. Mm-hmm. He wasn't mad because people were doing something to him. He was mad because his father was being dishonored and because other people were being abused and oppressed and taken advantage of. But I think if we're being honest, and I think this really will get at the heart of the question, if we're being honest, when we get angry, that's usually not why we're angry. Right?
Right.
Like, we're usually not angry because, oh my gosh, God is being dishonored and people are being hurt. It's usually, I'm being dishonored and I'm being hurt.
Yeah.
I feel disrespected and I feel devalued. And a lot of times that leads to unrighteous anger. Mm-hmm. We start expressing anger at the wrong things or in the wrong way or for the wrong reasons. We get on social media and we just blow up on people, just
that keyboard courage.
That's really easy to do when you're sitting in the basement at night people get courageous when they're behind the keyboard, we get super defensive and we go into self-protection mode. We shut down on people and we disengage relationally, or some of us, man, if somebody hurts us, we want revenge.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay him back, and I'm just confessing, this has always been me over the course of my life. We always want to be the person to get the last word in when we're having the argument.
Yeah.
Like it just,
I've never done that.
We
but
can't.
I've heard that some people struggle with that.
Some people do, yeah. Glad you're holier than I am, bro. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like this is unrighteous anger. And what fascinates me about Jesus is he never did this. Mm-hmm. He never expressed anger in that way. He never got angry about personal attacks.
Yeah.
Never got angry about insults, people confronting him. He never blew up on anybody because of differences in political or cultural ideologies. In fact, in Isaiah 53, which I know we talked about several weeks ago on this podcast, we see something very different, right? That Jesus was falsely accused, unjustly condemned. People thought he had been cursed by God, accused him of that, yet he didn't open his mouth.
Yeah.
And he didn't fight back, and he didn't defend himself, and he didn't get angry. Mm-hmm. And so, to bring it back to the question, I think the question that I would ask the person who claims to have righteous anger is this: does your anger look like the anger of Jesus? Mm-hmm. Are you angry at the things he was angry with?
Yeah.
And are you expressing that anger in the ways that he expressed his anger, or is your anger more about you?
Yeah.
Again, are you just the person trying to prove points and trying to defend yourself and trying to win arguments? Because if your anger is centered on you, not on God or other people, that's a different type of anger that we see in Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I think we all have to pay very close attention to that, because James, the brother of Jesus, says in James chapter 1 that anger does not bring about the righteous life that God requires.
Right.
So now we're back to the word righteous again. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just, again, say it like I said it before.
Yeah.
When we are operating out of anger that is centered on us, we can't do right by God, and we cannot do right by people.
Yeah.
But instead, we're going to act in ways that dishonor God and do great damage to people.
Yeah.
So again, the question is, does your anger look like the anger of Jesus? And only you can answer that question at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I think about the phrase that he used in the question, trivial things.
Yeah.
And at the expense of people.
Yep.
Now, I can think of some pretty trivial stuff that I've gotten upset about over the years. I'm joking earlier. I've never had that problem. Obviously that's ridiculous. But I found that if I am trying to approach somebody, this is righteous anger that guy stole my parking spot at Target, right? And I'm going to go put a dent in his bumper. If you're in a position to ask questions, I would just simply say, hey, so, why are you upset? Mm-hmm. Are you upset because that offends God somehow? Or are you upset because it offends you?
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes those will correlate.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But I would say with the phrasing trivial things, I think we can go ahead and just take that at face value. Things are unimportant.
Right, yeah.
But then even talking about what we kind of mentioned about last week about the alcohol, there's a lot of people that would claim righteous anger over the consumption of alcohol.
Right.
And then again, I would say, okay, is it because that person, it is sin and it's dishonoring God? Because, if that guy's getting drunk and beating his wife, then yes, we need to be upset about that.
Absolutely.
But is, you having a beer on the weekend while you grill some burgers, and that's the extent of it,
right?
Then I think maybe we can calm down a little bit.
Right. Good word.
All right, let's jump on to the next one.
Yeah.
All right, we're continuing on the anger theme. All right, so this person says, as broken people who can't bear the image of God perfectly, when does our anger cross the line into sin?
Yeah. All right. Well, at the risk of sounding very, very simplistic, here's going to be my answer. And again, there's probably other answers to this question, but here's the answer that I jotted down. When we fail to treat human beings as image bearers, I believe we've crossed the line into sin.
Yeah.
And so every human being is created by God in his image. That life possesses intrinsic worth and dignity and value. And so any time that our anger leads us to treat a person as less than that, we have crossed the line into sin. And so I want to go to the scriptures and just unpack that a bit. So Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22, this is Jesus, the famous Sermon on the Mount. And he teaches on the topic of anger. And he says, you have heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who's angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. And so Jesus is doing something very interesting in this text, and I think this is challenging to every single one of us, myself included, right? Like we all need to hear this, but he quotes the 6th commandment from the 10 commandments. Yeah. You shall not murder. And hopefully we all agree that's a good commandment.
Yeah, I think we need to stick with that one.
You don't even have to be a Christian to agree. That's a good commandment. We probably shouldn't go around murdering people, but murder by definition is the unlawful killing of a human being. That is a good commandment. And the reason that we don't murder people, it goes back to this image-bearing thing that I talked about a moment ago. So it's not like, oh, well, that's not a nice thing to do. We shouldn't murder people. It's bigger than that. It's no, all people have been created by God in his image. He's the giver of life, and therefore murder is wrong. To take the matter of life and death into our own hands and to say that we have the right to make those decisions, it is also to challenge the very sovereignty of God. Like those decisions are in his hands and in his hands alone. And so this is why Jesus ultimately says that the murderer is liable to judgment, okay? Yeah. When you start taking the lives of people in your own hands and you take those decisions out of the hands of God, this is such a serious offense that judgment is the necessary punishment. In our society today, this is why we don't let murderers just walk free. Like you murder somebody, man, you're getting locked up, you're going to prison. Yeah. It might mean the death penalty, depending upon the situation. Under the Old Testament law, that was the penalty. Yeah. Like if you took the life of another human being, your life was required of you. Quickly. We see it in Numbers 35:31 that it was such a serious offense against both God and your fellow man that if you took a life, your life was on the line, no questions asked. And so Jesus, when he was speaking to this audience, they knew all this. Like this was no surprise, you know? Don't murder people, and if you do, man, it's a serious offense, and judgment's going to be great. But what he went on to say they had never heard before. He says next, if you're angry toward another person, like the murderer, you're also liable to judgment. But not just the judgment of man, the judgment of God. And so what he's doing, and this is crazy, he's equating the act of murder with the attitude of anger. And he's making the point that the consequence of these things are the same. Yeah. And then he gets really practical. He actually shows us how to identify anger, not just in the lives of other people, but in our own lives, okay? He talks about insulting someone. And in the NIV, we actually find a word used there, raka, R-A-C-A. It's an Aramaic word. It means empty-headed, idiot, jerk, nobody. And then he goes on to talk about calling someone a fool. Yeah. And the word fool, this is the Greek word moros. It's where we get our English word moron. And you're literally speaking to someone's moral condition when you call them a moron.
Not how we typically use it.
Right, exactly. But that word is significant in the Bible because it's also used to refer to the person who says in their heart that there is no God. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. And so here's the point that Jesus is making. If you are angry with someone, at some point your mouth is going to tell on you. Yeah. Like you can only hide that anger for so long before your mouth is going to tell on you, right? Matthew 12:34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Yeah. And so if you have anger and bitterness buried in your heart, at some point, what you're going to do is you're going to attack the intelligence of that person, the character of that person. You're going to speak in a way that would suggest that they are morally corrupt, deserving of judgment, deserving of hell themselves. And Jesus says, when you do that, like the murderer, you're guilty of judgment. Yeah. You're acting in a way that would make you guilty of hell. And these are really hard words that we all have to take to heart. And so I would go back. Like, how do you know you've crossed the line into sin? If you've ever been so angry that you've done this to somebody, you've crossed a line. If you've ever been so angry that you've treated another human being as less than an image bearer, as a nobody, as insignificant, invaluable, if you have ever destroyed someone with your words, if you have ever assassinated someone's character with your speech, you have crossed the line into sin, and your mouth reveals that there's something going on in your heart that you need to deal with. That would be my answer.
That's a pretty good one.
And it's hard, man.
It is hard.
And I don't want to sit here behind this microphone and act like I don't struggle with this too.
Yeah.
I think at times this is a struggle for all of us.
Yeah.
Thank God for his grace, and thank God for his spirit that is constantly trying to work this out of us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, as kind of a litmus test, we were talking about how Jesus made a whip.
Yeah.
And you're not going to do that. It's not just whipping it out of the back pocket and braiding it real quick and going. It takes a while.
Right.
It was calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was in control.
Yes.
Of what he was doing.
That's right.
So if we want to start asking ourselves the question, have I drifted into sin? And maybe that anger started out righteous, but then it drifts into sin.
Yeah.
I would start asking myself the question, have I completely lost control?
That's a great question.
Am I acting impulsively and rashly?
Yeah.
Am I thinking about the things that are coming out of my mouth, or are they just coming out, right? And again, I've heard people have problems with this, but
not us, right? Not us. Yeah.
What measure of control, if I am experiencing this anger and I really am not sure, what measure of control do I have over my tongue?
Yeah. Yep.
And over my actions?
Yeah.
Would be a very good litmus test to understand, okay, is this sin or is this righteous? And then, coupled with everything that you just said, I read an article recently about righteous anger, and it said to ask yourself the question, is my motive to be right or to be righteous?
It's a great question.
But also a hard one.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Because I think we want it to be righteous.
Right.
And we can come up with a lot of reasons why it is, but then when we go through everything we just talked about, we have to ask ourselves the question, what is more important to me right now?
That's right. Yep.
And that's not easy, especially when you're angry.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Next one. You ready?
I'm ready, man. Let's go.
So they've all been good. This one was particularly interesting to me. This person asked, does righteous anger ever justify the use of force?
Great question. And
because Jesus is using some force. I mean, he's flipping tables. He's beating people with whips. I mean, he's using some force.
He absolutely is. And so I think the question's great, man, and it's important. My answer would be this. On the rare occasion, okay, does righteous anger ever justify the use of force? Yes, on the rare, keyword, rare occasion. So I just jotted down a few examples. Someone breaks into your house, and you're there, and your family's there, and your kids are there, and they are threatening you or the lives of those you love. Well, you might need to use some force, man.
Probably going to get a little angry.
Yeah, for sure. What you probably don't need to do is just let that person destroy you and your family. So some force might be necessary for the sake of self-defense. I don't know why this one came to mind, but I just wrote down, if you see a woman being beaten up in the middle of the street by a man, you might need to use some force.
Probably going to need to get involved.
Like, don't just walk by and or dude, this is the stupidity of our culture. Don't pull out your phone and videotape it.
Yeah.
Like, interject yourself, do something to help stop it, and that's probably going to require some force. I was thinking about my daughters, man, like how I would give my life for my 3 little girls. I would give my life for my wife, Amber. Yeah. And so, man, if we were out and someone tried to snatch one of my kids away, well, you better believe I'm probably going to use some force to stop that. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make sure it doesn't happen. And so I would say, yes, on the rare occasion, force is an appropriate response, but it should be the exception, not the norm.
Right.
I think the problem in our culture is that, sadly, force has become the norm.
Yeah.
People get angry, and then people get aggressive.
Right.
It's been said that we live in the age of rage. And I think we see that each and every day around us. And I mean, it's obviously true. Social media and, whatever. But we've seen it in some interesting ways over the last few years. Right. I remember a couple years ago when the George Floyd incident happened and he was killed by the police officer, and all the protests happened in all of these cities and the riots began. And, we watched entire cities being destroyed, burned to the ground.
Right.
over the last few years. I mean, I've heard stories of people going and blowing up abortion clinics because of their outrage over the fact that unborn babies are being murdered and having their lives taken. And, you know, when I think about these topics, racial injustice, abortion, man, we should get angry about these things.
100%.
It is only right that we get angry about these things, because these are image bearers, human beings created by God, being damaged, being destroyed, being marginalized and oppressed. But it matters how we express that anger, right? The right expression is not, let's burn cities down. And the right expression is not, let's blow abortion clinics up.
Right.
Because when that happens, other image bearers are being damaged and hurt in the process.
Right.
I mean, you think about that, man. I go back to the riots. Like, there were innocent people, man, who had their businesses taken away, destroyed, homes, right?
Everything, yeah.
In these abortion clinics, there are people there who, you know, for whatever reason, they've walked in the doors, and man, they're having their lives taken from them, which is not the right response.
Right.
And so I think that as the people of God, this is where we have to think counterintuitively. This is where we have to be countercultural. Again, we have to be angry about these things, but righteous anger demands that we respond in the right way, and at the right people or systems or whatever it is that we might call it. And so one other thought I would add to this, and then Mike, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Romans 13 came to mind as I was considering this question, because in Romans 13, Paul talks about the institution of human government. And he makes the point there that human government exists to exercise force on the behalf of its citizens when necessary.
Right.
And so human government was instituted by God himself for the protection of citizens, for the good of citizens. And sometimes this means force has to be exercised. So, for example, if someone commits a crime, it is the job of our governing officials to punish that crime in a way that fits the crime.
Right.
Another example that came to mind, war. War. And so, man, nobody wants to go to war. I mean, bro, you served in the military for many years, and war, it is a horrific thing. Nobody wants it. Nobody hopes for that. But sometimes it's necessary.
Right.
You know, if our nation is attacked, we may need to go to war.
Right.
If across the world somewhere people's lives are being taken from them unjustly, innocent people, it might mean that other nations have to get involved in protecting the lives of those people. There was a professor at Yale Law School, his name's Stephen Carter. He once said that war is horrible and should be fought rarely and only to avoid greater horrors. And I thought there's a lot of wisdom in that statement, but this is where we as citizens have to trust our governing officials to decide these things. Like, what we can't do when it comes to criminals is take matters in our own hands. Well, I'll use force against the criminal.
Right.
No, that's their job. We can have opinions on war, but at the end of the day, they have to decide. I would also say this is why we need to pray for our governing officials.
Yeah.
And all those serving in positions of authority, doesn't matter if you like them or not. Doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. You need to be praying for them, because each and every day they have very hard decisions to make. And oftentimes those decisions involve the lives of real people. And so, just to reiterate, I think on the rare occasion, yes, force is an appropriate response, but rarely should it be our first response. So you got other thoughts on that, man?
Well, I think I would just build on some of the things that you just said. Like, you know, I served in the Army for 10 years. Went to Iraq twice.
And thank you for your service, bro.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Iraq twice, Afghanistan once. And, you know, there were reasons to exercise force. And regardless of how you feel about the conflicts or the military, and I mean, you can like it, not like it. That's not necessarily, I guess, what we're talking about. But it's more the point of we can find ourselves in a position where force is necessary. But to your point, you know, war being the extreme. Someone breaking into your house and trying to murder you and your family. The extreme. You know, all of these things, these are extremes. But when we think about just in our kind of day-to-day lives, And we look at how Jesus exercised anger in this situation. And then even when we look in the Old Testament where we see God's wrath, it is always slow.
Yeah, right.
And you brought up James chapter 1.
Yeah.
Right? So before that, it talks about being slow to anger.
Yeah, yeah.
God is slow to anger.
Yep.
The fact that we still exist proves that he is slow to anger. He's slow to wrath. So in those instances, I would argue that it is almost a last resort.
Correct. That's right.
Right? Because we have these instances, and this specific one with Jesus about getting angry and flipping the tables and this type of thing, but we have way more evidence of Jesus being compassionate and patient and caring and all of these things. We have way more examples of that.
Yeah.
So to zero in on this one example of Jesus getting upset and whipping some people and flipping some tables, similar to like last week when we were talking about alcohol, like if these are the two things we're going to take away from Jesus' life, we're missing the point.
For sure.
Right. I can get angry and I can drink alcohol. Don't do those two together. That's not going to work out.
That's right. You know, I said this in the office to you earlier today, and I think it's worth repeating on the podcast. You know, the reason that Jesus got angry is because he loves.
Right.
He got angry at sin because he loves sinners.
Right.
He got angry at those who were taking advantage of their power and their authority because he loves those that are not in positions of power and authority. And so love was coupled with anger.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we see that. Like, is your anger fueled by your love for God and your love for people?
Yeah.
And if it's not, then it's probably not righteous anger.
Right.
Right? It's probably not the same type of anger that we see in Jesus. And so I think you make a really great point, Mike.
But I think we have to understand, too, that we're not God.
Yeah.
So for us to exercise our liberty to get angry, we're probably going to mess it up.
Yeah. Yeah, we're still broken at the end of the day, which Jesus was not.
I had a buddy that gave me he gave me an illustration. We were talking about our kids and technology.
Yeah.
Like what we should allow them to do, when they can have a phone, all that kind of stuff. And he told me, he's like, I don't let my 5-year-old play with the stove because there's fire and it's hot and she's going to burn herself because she's not mature enough to handle that.
Yeah, yeah.
But he said, but that doesn't mean that I don't use the stove.
Right.
And I don't use fire because I'm mature enough to understand how to handle it appropriately.
Yeah.
I think we can approach the topic of anger the exact same way. We have to understand, okay, if it's my first reaction, it's probably the wrong reaction. And then understanding, like, am I dealing with this so much that I don't have the maturity? I mean, if you're angry on a regular basis, you probably don't have the maturity to be handling it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So being able to take that step back and then really, and again, going back to my military days, PTSD, anger, all that kind of stuff has been an issue.
Yeah.
And at times comes back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So understanding that it is important that you're seeking out that help you need to process it. So if you're angry all the time, like you are jacked up and like at 110 all the time, just waiting for someone to get angry with or to unleash that, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I would encourage if that's you listening to this thing to, from a guy who's done it, seek out some counseling and get some help to kind of process through why that anger exists.
Love that, bro. Yep. And we have a counseling center here at Cross Point. So reach out. Let us know if you need help, man. We'll get you the help you need for sure.
All right, last one.
Okay.
And it's kind of a little off of what we've been talking about, but it does, because it does have something to do with what you were talking about in your sermon, because you talked a lot about like what we do as a church, like we're drilling wells, we're fostering kids through Compassion International, and like we're doing all of these things as a church. The question that came in was about panhandlers. Okay. Which it was an interesting question. I've gone back and forth with this myself, and I've heard people, again, very strong opinions about whether you should or shouldn't give them money. So the question is it enabling to give to these individuals, or should we just stick to charity orgs only?
Okay. All right, I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
I don't think that I would ever label it enabling. But and in some cases it might be. I don't know. But here's my answer. I think you have to listen to the prompting of the Holy Spirit in moments like these. Okay.
Right.
A couple just random thoughts on giving because part of the question was about charity orgs. I'm a firm believer that we give to God's church first.
Yeah.
Like we need to give to the local church where we are being fed spiritually. We need to contribute to the family that we're a part of. And at the end of the day, we know this biblically, the church is the only organization in existence instituted by God for the fulfillment of the Great Commission.
Yeah.
God didn't start a bunch of other organizations to pull that off. He started the church to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And so I am a firm believer through and through, and this is why our family gives most of our money to the church before we give it to any other organizations.
Right.
We have to fund the advance of the kingdom in that way. So I would start with the church, and then I would give, I wouldn't call them charity orgs, but I would call them gospel-centered organizations, parachurch organizations that exist to meet needs and to get the gospel to people in places where it's needed.
Right.
There's a lot of great organizations out there that do humanitarian work, but not all of them do gospel work.
Right.
And so I'm not saying don't give your money to those. I'm just saying I probably wouldn't give a lot of money to organizations that are only seeking to make people more comfortable as they head toward an eternity spent apart from God.
Right. Yep.
If I'm going to be a wise steward with the resources that God's given me, well, I want to find organizations like Compassion International.
Yeah.
I want to find organizations like Live 2540, and I want to give my money to them because I know that they're not only meeting tangible needs, but they're also seeking to meet the spiritual need, which is the greatest need.
Yeah.
And then panhandlers, okay? Those people that come to you and they want something or they want money and they stand on the side of the road with their sign or whatever.
Yeah.
This, again, is where I would say you have to learn to listen to the prompting of the Holy Spirit, okay? Personally, there have been occasions where I've done nothing, and there have been occasions where it's like the Lord's screaming at me.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you need to do something right now. I had a situation not long ago at the Ingalls parking lot.
Okay.
Right here in Seaville, man. And these guys they'll walk up on me. I don't know. Maybe I just look like a guy who wants to give them money.
You got a bunch of money in your wallet.
Yeah, I don't know, man. But I had this guy approach me. I'm getting out of my truck, and he's like, hey, man, I'm hungry. Can you give me something? And so instead of giving him something, I was like, well, follow me inside. Follow me, and I'll buy you whatever you want, man. I'll buy you lunch, I'll buy you a drink. And so that's what I did. And told him why I was doing it, and God bless you, and got his name, and, the whole deal. And in that moment, I really felt that if I did not do something for that man, I was going to be walking in disobedience to God.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to pay attention to how the Spirit of God is leading you in moments like that. And if he is, don't pass it up. And if he's not, maybe that's for a reason.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's the same response in every situation.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Well, I think that, and again, I think, we talked about how, there's always obviously a lot of opinions.
For sure.
Right? You see a lot of the social media posts of, the guy holding the sign saying he needs money and food next to a now hiring sign, right? But I do think that I think it's dangerous when we start assuming that person is a con artist or
right.
Lazy or whatever, because we have to understand that there is a portion of that person's world that we just don't understand. How they got there, why they're still in it, all of those things we have no idea.
Yep.
So I think I would say I would be weary of saying, okay, well, that person is just made terrible decisions and now they're worthy of standing on that corner begging for money. Right. Because going back to the image bearer thing, we're all image bearers and we don't know what happened in that person's story.
That's right.
But I would say it goes back to kind of build on what you're saying is to the prompting of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
If you're at that red light and you're trying your hardest to not make eye contact, right? You got your window up, your door's locked, but you feel that prompting. It's like, you got $5, $10, $20, whatever that amount is in your pocket.
Yeah.
And you are feeling this impression to give that money to that person.
Yeah.
I would say you need to do it because your flesh is never going to tell you to give that money to that person begging on the street.
That's right.
Never.
That's right.
It's not your flesh. It's the Holy Spirit, and you need to listen.
Yeah, screaming at you.
And then some of the arguments I've heard too for not doing it is like, well, they're drunks and they're just going to go spend it on alcohol, or they're going to go buy drugs, or they're going to do whatever. And it's like, well, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's not our problem.
That's
or our concern, right?
That's right.
You know, if we're being prompted to do a thing, we need to do the thing, and we don't need to worry about what the consequences are, like what he's going to do or she's going to do with that money or any of that kind of stuff. That's not our problem.
That's right.
Our problem is the Lord's telling me to give that guy $5 and I don't want to.
And have I done it? Yeah.
Right.
Let me offer 2 quick final thoughts, and then we can be done, okay? Number 1, some practical advice for somebody who struggles with this. I have a friend who shared what he does, and I thought it was brilliant. Dude, he just keeps like a stack of McDonald's gift cards in his truck or in his wallet. And so if he rolls up on somebody that is holding the sign, instead of giving cash, he gives a gift card.
Yeah.
Because he knows, well, he's going to use that for food to feed himself. And so if you struggle with money, just go buy a bunch of Chick-fil-A or McDonald's gift cards and hand those out.
Yeah.
Then on the other side of that, as you were talking, Mike, what the writer of Hebrews said came to mind. Don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers. You never know when you might be entertaining angels.
Right.
And so you can get all up in your head and go, what if, and what if they're the drunk, and what if they're the con artist, and what if the whatever. And I'm just going, well, what if it's
an angel?
Yeah, a being that God put in your path as a means of testing your faithfulness and obedience to Him. And, you know, people might want to argue, does that stuff still happen today? Well, that's New Testament stuff. And so I would just say, if the Spirit of God is prompting you, don't miss that opportunity to show hospitality to that person. Just be obedient to God.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to put a pin in it for this week.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to wrap it up right there. Again, thank you so much for listening to The Pursuit. If you'd like more information about our church or this podcast, you can check out our website at crosspointcity.com or follow us on any of your favorite social media platforms. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to hear more, please go ahead and click like and subscribe so you can be notified when new episodes come up. And if you want to leave us a rating, we would greatly appreciate that. But until next week, know that we are here for you and we love you.